There are moments in life when even the strongest among us feel weary. The ones with vision, the ones carrying divine assignments, the ones chosen to shift generations, they often wake up exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I want to tell you something today, that exhaustion is not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes, it's the weight of purpose pressing on your spirit. You see, when you are chosen, your life is not your own. You don't walk the same path as everyone else. You are pulled in directions others don't understand. You are stretched by God because your capacity must grow before your calling can manifest. The tiredness you feel is not random, it's the sign of a vessel being prepared. There are seasons in the life of a chosen one when fatigue doesn't come from lack of sleep or overwork, but from the invisible weight of purpose resting on their soul. When God places a divine assignment on your life, it carries a spiritual gravity that can only be understood by those walking in obedience. The exhaustion you feel isn't always physical, it's spiritual. It's the stretching of your inner being as it tries to align with a destiny that's far greater than your current capacity. God doesn't give great responsibility to the comfortable, He gives it to the prepared. And preparation is never painless. You may wonder why, even when you're doing the right things, serving faithfully, and walking in obedience, you still feel drained. It's because every step of destiny requires an exchange, your comfort for His calling, your strength for His will. When you're chosen, you're not just living your life, you're carrying generations within you. Your spirit carries burdens unseen by others. There are moments when your heart feels heavy for no reason, and you can't explain it. That's because you're spiritually sensitive to divine movements in your environment. You sense change before it happens. You feel warfare before it manifests. The chosen are not ordinary people, they are spiritual conduits through which heaven releases its purpose on earth. And that role comes with a cost. The weariness you experience is the evidence that heaven trusts you to endure what others could not handle. Sometimes that tiredness comes from walking through seasons where it feels like God is silent. You're obeying, but there's no visible result. You're sowing, but you see no harvest. You're praying, but the answers seem delayed. Yet, during those moments of divine silence, God is building something in you that can't be developed in comfort. The chosen are refined through pressure. Like gold in the furnace, you're being purified until what's left is not your ambition, but His character. The weight of purpose always demands endurance because destiny is not achieved overnight, it's shaped through consistent obedience even when no one applauds. You may notice that ordinary people seem to move freely, while you have to be cautious with every decision. That's not unfairness, that's separation. When you're chosen, your path is consecrated. The boundaries around your life are divine protection, not restriction. You can't do what others do, because you're carrying something sacred. And that spiritual responsibility often manifests as emotional or physical fatigue, because you're living at a higher level of spiritual awareness. The constant battle between your divine purpose and your human limitations creates a tension that drains your energy. Yet, that very tension is proof that you are walking in purpose. When heaven chooses you, you become a vessel through which divine plans are carried out. And vessels must be emptied, cleansed, and filled repeatedly. That cycle of emptying and refilling can make you feel worn, but it's part of the process that ensures you're always aligned with God's will. Many people assume that feeling tired means they are overworking or doing too much, but for the chosen, fatigue often comes from a deeper source, resistance to divine process. When God begins to shape your destiny, He takes you through seasons that refine you, not to punish you but to prepare you. The struggle doesn't come from the work itself, it comes from the battle between your will and His will. The chosen often grow weary not because the journey is too long, but because they keep fighting the direction in which God is leading them. Every time you resist transformation, you create spiritual tension, and that tension drains your strength. You cannot carry divine purpose with a mindset built for comfort. The exhaustion you feel is the friction between the old you and the version God is trying to bring forth. God's process is designed to strip away everything that hinders destiny. He removes pride, impatience, fear, and dependence on others, but many resist that pruning because it feels like loss. You pray for increase, yet God brings subtraction. You ask for clarity, yet He allows confusion. You desire elevation, yet He sends isolation. In those moments, your spirit fights to understand what your mind cannot comprehend. You think something is going wrong, but in truth, everything is going right. God cannot pour new strength into an unbroken vessel. The chosen grow weary because they are being reshaped by invisible hands, stretched beyond the familiar into the unknown, and that stretching process is never comfortable. When you resist change, you prolong your own exhaustion. The process becomes heavier because you are trying to move forward while holding onto what God has already asked you to release. Many feel drained because they are clinging to expired seasons, relationships, habits, and environments that no longer fit where God is taking them. Purpose demands evolution, and evolution requires surrender. The more you fight the breaking, the more tired you become. It is not the calling that wears you down, it is your unwillingness to yield completely to the one who gave it. The chosen must understand that spiritual fatigue is often a message from God, not a punishment. It is His way of saying, stop striving in your strength. When you operate in obedience, grace carries you. But when you operate in resistance, burden overtakes you. God's assignments are never meant to drain, they are meant to flow. When you move in harmony with His will, even challenges become fuel. But when you walk in opposition, even small tasks feel like mountains. That's why some people who carry great callings feel constant heaviness. They are still trying to manage destiny instead of submitting to it. The process of refinement requires trust. You must trust that what God removes, He replaces with something greater. You must trust that every delay is divine timing. You must trust that the breaking you feel is not destruction, but construction. Every moment of weariness carries a lesson of surrender, teaching your heart to rest in obedience rather than fight for control. When a person is chosen for something great, they must understand that the anointing is not just a symbol of blessing, it is a mantle of pressure. Every divine calling carries a weight, and that weight demands strength, discipline, and endurance. The moment purpose is revealed, opposition is also released. The same oil that attracts favor also attracts warfare. Many are drawn to the glory of being chosen but are unaware of the crushing that comes before the crown. The anointing does not come to make life easier, it comes to prepare you for responsibility. The pressure that follows is not there to break you but to build capacity for what is coming. The greater your calling, the greater the refining process. God must ensure that your character can sustain what your gift will draw. When God places an assignment on your life, He begins to expose weaknesses you didn't know existed. Suddenly, situations arise that test your patience, humility, and faith. People misunderstand you, doors close, and silence replaces applause. All of this is not coincidence, it's divine calibration. The pressure you feel is the evidence of God molding you into someone who can carry influence without losing integrity. You cannot walk in high places with a fragile spirit. The anointing will demand that you grow, stretch, and release things that once felt comfortable. The chosen cannot remain ordinary because their mission is extraordinary. The preparation will always match the size of the purpose. The pressure attached to being chosen often feels unfair. You watch others live freely while you are being refined in private. You see people succeed with less effort, yet you seem to face resistance at every turn. What you don't realize is that others are being trained for moments, but you are being trained for legacy. The anointing on your life doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone connected to you. God is not merely shaping your circumstances, He's shaping the generations that will come through you. The pressure you endure is producing endurance, wisdom, and resilience. Without that process, you would crumble under the very blessing you prayed for. Every great calling will be tested. The anointing will attract both opportunity and opposition. It will draw people who celebrate you and those who criticize you. It will bring seasons of abundance and seasons of isolation. But in every season, the pressure has purpose. God uses it to teach you dependence on Him rather than on your ability. He allows it to humble you before He elevates you. He uses it to separate the temporary from the eternal in your life. The anointing cannot dwell in comfort, it thrives in surrender. The weight you carry is not punishment but privilege. It means heaven trusts you with responsibility that others could not bear. It means your purpose carries power that must be handled with maturity. The greater the pressure you face, the greater the promise that waits beyond it. Spiritual weariness often enters when the chosen pour out endlessly without returning to the source that empowers them. Many gifted people mistake activity for productivity, thinking that constant motion equals spiritual effectiveness. They serve, preach, help, lead, and counsel others until there is nothing left to give, forgetting that even divine assignments require divine replenishment. You cannot pour from an empty vessel, yet the chosen frequently try. They feel obligated to keep giving because they believe that resting might appear as weakness or lack of faith. What they don't realize is that ministry, service, and purpose were never designed to function independently of God's presence. Every time you pour out, you must also be poured into, or eventually the weight of your calling becomes heavier than your strength to carry it. When you neglect intimacy with the source, your spirit begins to dry up even while your hands remain busy. You can look effective on the outside while being empty on the inside. The danger for those with great purpose is that their gift can continue to operate even when their spirit is running low. You can still inspire others while you yourself are running on fumes. That is why spiritual fatigue is so deceptive, it hides behind productivity. You can be active for God yet distant from Him. The chosen often mistake divine grace for endless endurance, forgetting that grace is meant to flow, not to be exploited. God designed the flow of purpose to be cyclical. He fills, you pour. He fills again, you pour again. When that cycle is interrupted, weariness takes over. There comes a moment when you must learn to pause, not because the mission is finished but because the vessel needs renewal. Jesus Himself demonstrated this principle repeatedly. Even though the crowds pressed around Him, He withdrew to solitary places to pray. He understood that strength for the assignment comes from stillness in the presence of God. Power does not come from motion, it comes from connection. The chosen who fail to grasp this truth begin to experience mental fog, emotional fatigue, and spiritual dullness. They lose the sharpness of discernment, not because their calling has faded, but because they have disconnected from the very presence that fuels their purpose. Every act of giving should be balanced with an act of receiving. Every time you release wisdom, encouragement, or energy into others, you must return to the secret place to be refilled. That place of prayer, worship, and solitude is not optional, it is the lifeline for those chosen to carry heavy assignments. God never intended for His vessels to operate independently of His flow. When the chosen attempt to handle divine burdens with human effort, exhaustion becomes inevitable. The body grows weak, the mind becomes restless, and the heart starts questioning whether the calling is worth it. But the fatigue is not a sign of failure, it is a reminder to return to the source that never runs dry. Fatigue is not always caused by doing too much but often by doing what was never assigned. Many chosen ones become weary because they carry responsibilities that God never authorized them to take on. They are trying to fix situations, people, and outcomes that belong to God alone. When you operate outside of divine instruction, you expend energy without grace. Grace empowers you to accomplish what God has ordained, but when you step beyond that boundary, strength begins to fade. The chosen often have compassionate hearts, they feel drawn to help, to solve, to intervene, but sometimes that compassion turns into control. Instead of letting God handle what is beyond their assignment, they attempt to manage it themselves, and the result is exhaustion. Alignment is the key to sustainable strength. The moment you begin to carry what does not belong to you, the weight becomes unbearable. God designed purpose with divine balance. Every task He gives is accompanied by sufficient grace to perform it. That is why obedience is lighter than self-will. When you stay within the boundaries of your calling, there is flow, peace, and endurance. But when you drift into areas God never sanctioned, you begin to experience resistance. The chosen often confuse good intentions with divine direction. Just because something seems right does not mean it is appointed for you. Many people are drained not because life is too hard, but because they are doing God's work without God's approval. Fatigue becomes a divine signal that you are out of alignment. When you feel constantly burdened, it may not be that your calling is too heavy, it may be that you are carrying unnecessary loads. Spiritual misalignment creates emotional chaos. You start to feel frustrated, anxious, and unfulfilled even while doing meaningful work. That inner restlessness is heaven's reminder that you are operating outside of divine timing or territory. The chosen must learn to discern the difference between a divine burden and a self-imposed one. A divine burden draws you closer to God, a self-imposed one pushes you into exhaustion. When you do what God calls you to do, there is strength that follows, but when you attempt to do what only God can do, there is immediate depletion. The chosen are not called to carry everything, they are called to carry purpose. Letting go of what is not yours to bear is not neglect, it is obedience. You must learn to trust God enough to handle what He has not given you permission to fix. When you step back and allow Him to work, your strength begins to return. Misalignment drains energy, but alignment restores it. The peace of knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be becomes the greatest source of renewal. Every chosen one must learn the discipline of saying no to distractions that masquerade as opportunities. It is not rejection, it is preservation. The moment you realign with what God truly called you to do, fatigue loses its power because grace takes over the weight. True rest is not found in inactivity but in surrender. Many chosen ones confuse rest with doing nothing, yet rest is the state of total trust in God's will. It is the quiet confidence that even when nothing seems to be moving, God is still working. Rest is not the absence of movement, it is the presence of peace. When the chosen learn to rest in faith, they stop striving for outcomes and start flowing in divine rhythm. Strength is not renewed by constant motion but by stillness before God. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, is not a poetic phrase, it is a spiritual principle. Waiting is the place where strength is restored, clarity returns, and the soul realigns with divine purpose. The chosen must understand that rest is a weapon, it silences fear, confuses the enemy, and recharges the spirit for the next assignment. The exhaustion many chosen feel comes from the habit of trying to control what belongs to God. They try to force timing, push progress, and manufacture results, forgetting that divine purpose unfolds in seasons, not seconds. The pressure to see immediate manifestation creates mental fatigue and spiritual frustration. Rest calls you to release that pressure. It teaches you that God's timing is not delayed, it's deliberate. When you surrender, you stop fighting against the process and start flowing with it. True faith rests because it knows that what God promised cannot fail. The chosen often exhaust themselves by trying to prove their calling rather than simply living it. When you trust God fully, you no longer need to strive for validation, peace becomes your proof. Rest is also a spiritual realignment. It brings you back to the center of God's will. When you withdraw from chaos and step into stillness, your spirit becomes sensitive again. You begin to hear divine whispers that were drowned out by noise and busyness. In that sacred quiet, God reveals new instructions and refreshes old promises. The chosen must learn to guard their peace as diligently as they guard their purpose. Without peace, power becomes unstable. The one who knows how to rest in God cannot be easily shaken, because their strength does not come from circumstances, it flows from connection. Rest also reminds you of your dependence on God. It is an act of humility, a declaration that says, I cannot do this without you. Every moment of rest is a return to the source. It is in that place that your spirit is refilled, your vision becomes clear, and your heart finds stability again. The chosen cannot afford to live on empty, their assignment demands constant renewal. Resting in faith is not retreating from responsibility, it is recharging for greater responsibility. The stronger your trust in God, the less your strength will be drained by anxiety. When you rest in Him, you exchange your weakness for His power and your weariness for His peace.